Okay, so I did my thesis on a group of parasitic wasps. This is what they look like. And I was surprised to find that there's a lot of undescribed species, even in Sweden, of this group and some other insect groups as well. So this spurred an interest in this seemingly simple question. What's the actual size and composition of the insect fauna? We don't really know the answer, even for Sweden. And some 20 years ago, we got like a first chance to try to get to the bottom of this question. It was the Swedish malaise trap project. So it looks like a sort of a baby variant of the IBA project, right? We had 73 traps at 50 sites across Sweden, and we ran these traps for up to 3 years. And this is what it looked like. I just want to show you some views of these traps in different environments. And we run these in southern Sweden. They collect insects even in the middle of the winter. And then, of course, you end up with a lot of material, a lot of insects that you need to go through. And at this point in time, of course, we did not have access to these genetic methods. So we had to do it the hard way. Okay, so we estimate we collected in this inventory 20 million specimens. We had more than 100 taxonomists around the world involved in trying to identify that material. And the work is still ongoing. And we summarized the results a few years ago. Then we had identified 1%. So that was 15 years after we had finished the field campaign. But the findings have been astonishing. We had, at that point, we had found 1,300 new species for Sweden in that material, about half of them tentatively identified as new to science. So that increased the Swedish fauna from 26,700 to 28,000 species. And we were asking ourselves, where does this stop? Where's the bottom? How many species do we have in Sweden of insects? So what we did was we tried to use 3 different methods to get an estimate of how much was still missing. And this complicated table has, let's focus on the bottom line here. So we asked experts, how many species do you think there's still out there to discover in your group? And then we summarized those numbers, and we get 5,000 species are still left to discover. Then we just looked at the proportion of unknowns that we find in the malaise trap project. Okay, still 5,000 species, so this looks promising, right? And then we use some more advanced statistical extrapolation methods. And if we choose the right method, we also end up with 5,000. So fantastic. We know what the fauna looks like. And we published this paper. Unfortunately, we put the question mark there after the title. Okay, so if you think you know what the fauna looks like, then you can try to visualize it. And I like this type of visualization. It's like a chromosome map where the width of each of these bars corresponds to the number of species in each group. So what's immediately obvious here is that most of the Swedish insects, they belong to this group, Hymenopterans. And Hymenopterans, most of the Hymenopterans are parasitic wasps. So these are so-called parasitoids. They feed on other insects. A lot of them have larvae that eat other insects from the inside. And the other group, which is almost as large, is the Diptera and a few other groups, but Diptera. And those are flies, midges, gnats, mosquitoes. All right? Each of these small colored pieces here corresponds to a family or subfamily in each of these groups. So you see a little bit of the diversity within. And then you have the beetles, and then the butterflies and moths, so Coleoptera and Lepidoptera, and then the rest is just small in comparison. So then you can try to understand what this means in terms of the composition of the fauna. So if you look at the different groups, I think I just showed that Hymenoptera and Diptera, so they constitute most of the insect fauna. Coleoptera, Lepidoptera, and then a few, the others are small in comparison. If you look at the niche composition, so that's what the insects do, right? What do they do for a living, if you wish? So here we divided the insects into 3 different communities. So the plant feeders, and then we also took the parasitoids that attack the plant feeders, put them together. You see each plant feeder species, there's one parasitoid attacking it almost. For decomposers, the blue thing here, there are much fewer parasitoids. So that's interesting, right? Interesting difference. And predators even have fewer parasitoids attacking them. Habitat composition, so habitat is where they live, right? Most insects live in or on plants. Then we have insects in soil, temporary habitats like dead, dying animals. They live in water, fungi, etc. But then it's interesting to look at all the new things we discover or we think we will discover. What are they? So most of the new things, they are in Hymenoptera and Diptera. Almost all of them are there. If you talk about niche composition, you see a lot of the new things are parasitoids. So there are more parasitoids here than in the complete fauna. And also there are more decomposers. So parasitoids and decomposers. And in habitat composition, there's fewer in or on plants and more in temporary habitats and fungi. So what can we say now, another 10 million insects later with the IBA material? Just to give you a feeling for how much more data we have now. For Sweden, we have 50 times as much data as we had in that previous inventory. And first, if we look at the total number of species, how many species do we have? In Sweden, in the IBA material, we've encountered more than 30,000 species. Remember, our previous estimate was 28,000 plus 5,000, so that was 33,000. So if we look at these accumulation curves, they should plateau when we reach the true size of the fauna. And this is sort of leveling off now in Sweden with the IBA material, but closely we have more than 33,000 species. We probably have something around 40,000, perhaps even up close to 50,000 species in the Swedish insect fauna. In Madagascar, look at the Madagascar numbers. It's not even close to leveling off. It's just continuing up. Nobody really knows where this curve is going to end. That we clearly have more than 75,000 species of insects in Madagascar. Of course, this just underlines the difference in the diversity between Sweden and Madagascar. So if we look at the distance and how different the insect faunas are, in Sweden, you have to move almost across the entire country to find an insect fauna that is basically different, has a different set of species. In Madagascar, it's enough to move just 300 kilometers away, and you get essentially a completely new insect fauna. And just to give you a context, that's the difference between Stockholm and Karlstad. If we look at the families that have most of the species, then it turns out we have a similar set of 20 families that are dominant in both insect faunas. And this is very consistent with a paper that came out last year, which went through Malaise trap catches from all corners of the world and found that the same 20 insect families dominate Malaise trap catches everywhere. And this is what they look like. These are really ugly, small, unattractive insects. They have enormous amounts of species in them, and they're not so insect systematists. They don't like to work on these groups because they're so challenging, they're so difficult to separate the species. Nobody else is working on them, so you never get your paper cited by anyone, right? So it's a complete nightmare, and that's sort of this negative spiral contributes to the fact that we know so little about insect faunas. And then these are preliminary analysis still, but if you look at the same types of compositional diagrams that I showed you previously for Sweden and for Madagascar. For Sweden, this pattern is still similar, but as a hymenopterist, I'm very offended that there seems to be actually more Diptera than Hymenoptera in Sweden. But that seems to be the pattern that we get. Niche composition, still this difference between phytophagus or plant feeders They have about the same number of parasitoids attacking them, fewer parasitoids attacking saprophagus species, and very few parasitoids on predators. Habitat composition, also similar composition. There are some similarities, but also some difference in Madagascar. So perhaps most importantly, dipterans, they're incredibly dominating in the Madagascar fauna in our data. The niche composition also is different. So we have fewer parasitoids in Madagascar relative to other insect species. And the habitat composition is more even in Madagascar. And of course, Laura and Rob will talk more about these patterns later. But wait now, there's one caveat. So I have sort of ignored an important fact here. We have a very incomplete sample of these faunas. So maybe there is a bias against certain groups. And I think there might be a reason to suspect there's a bias against Hymenopterus and parasitoids. So this is something we're going to try to analyze over the coming months. And I'm not going to give you an answer here. Thanks.